we start with Krakow studies. Maria Orwit, together with Antoni Kępiński and a group of young Krakowian psychiatrists, undertook a series of studies on post-traumatic problems as early as in 1959, interviewing 100 former prisoners of Auschwitz concentration camp. The study was the first in Poland and one of the first worldwide to investigate delayed consequences of trauma. The Krakowian studies were ahead of their time, being more holistic, theoretical, interested in the context, and less biological than their contemporary research projects. This study has been for years a rare, if not only, example of research conducted entirely irrespective of insurance claims and reparations to Holocaust survivors. However, in these studies, no Jewish subgroup had been distinguished among the prisoners of the Auschwitz concentration camp. In the research conducted by Professor Maria Orwit, Jewish issues emerged in the years 1989, 1992, meaning that in the period of radical socio-political changes in Poland and overcoming the taboo of the Holocaust and Jewishness. Together with a team of her collaborators, she examined then 20 Holocaust survivors and the same equinumerous, same group of the second generation respondents. This study revealed a traumatized population of persons struggling with loneliness, with questions concerning their identity, with their suboptimal functioning in family life. Owing to energetic efforts undertaken by Professor Orwit, a therapeutic program was launched in 1995. The program addressed to the children of the Holocaust was continued till the present day, is continued. We offer therapy to persons constituting a specific group in terms of social identification. As a rule, they come from assimilated Jewish families whose contacts with the Poles enable them to survive on the so-called Aryan side. Their double Polish identity prevented their immigration after the World War II and during the 1968 wave of immigration after the events, the anti-Semitic campaign. The marathon group psychotherapy model is used, 3-day workshops offering 6 hours of therapy daily are held twice or 3 times a year. We started with a group of about 80 participants. Each meeting was attended by 50, 60 people working in 4 groups. Since many participants have died during the past 19 years and some are not well enough to participate, our therapeutic groups are presently attended by 4 to 5 persons. The group were formed spontaneously with no initial qualification process, and any member of the Children of Holocaust Association were entitled to receive psychotherapy. Selection or exclusion of anybody from the survivor group seemed impossible after their war experiences. The lack of qualification and no baseline assessment of the severity of the participants' disorders have also destigmatizing function. They are provided with group psychotherapy not due to their impairment or problems, but just because they survived extreme life experiences. Survivors' psychological problems we have encountered in our therapeutic work are consistent with those described by researchers and therapists dealing with psychological consequences of the Holocaust. Complaints reported by group members include loneliness, a sense of isolation, and difficulty in interpersonal contacts, also with people closest to them. An important issue is that of fears related to trauma reactivation. Sometimes seemingly trivial political events and public or private anti-Semitic statements or messages can evoke panic and deepen the therapy participants' sense of isolation. Traumatic memories can also be activated by losses natural in their age group, such as death of close person, retirement, ill health, disability. Another important issue in Poland is the secret of survivors' Jewish background and the secret of the Holocaust. Almost all therapy participants had hidden their Jewish ancestry from their children until they reached the right age. Survivors believed the right age to be when the child is capable of hiding by herself, himself. And keeping the secret, of course. Parents were afraid their child might feel different, humiliated and rejected. Their own fears and apprehension were sometimes projected in an extreme form related to their wartime experiences. At the beginning of their therapy, some participants continued to hide their Jewish ancestry from their already adult children. Other families talking about themselves, about their Jewish roots, still maintain silence in regards survivors' experiences during the war. These families and their functioning can be classified using the Danieli as a typology as victims' families, where the family atmosphere is characterized by depression, worrying, distrustfulness, and fear of external world, as well as symbiotic attachment to the family. In the course of therapy, a majority of the participants decided about their coming out. At the family forum, at least. This decision may have resulted from other groups' members' reports about how their children responded to their Jewish background disclosure. The responses varied, even though group participants' fears of being rejected within the family and persecuted by external world turned out to be groundless. Group members are not homogeneous in respect of age, and therefore also of their wartime experiences. Some of them survived the war consciously, being aware of dangers, and sometimes feeling responsible for others. Those who were little children during the war either had no or only fragmentary memories of that period. They learned about their family history at later age, sometimes in adulthood. A recurrent issue is a comparison of traumatic wartime experiences of those who do remember the Holocaust with another type of trauma suffered by those who miss their closest relatives but do not have even memories of them. At the initial stage of therapy, a sort of competition in suffering could be seen among the group of patients born long enough before the war to remember that period, and those born at the beginning or during the war, and so have no wartime memories. Some participants of the latter group had lost all their family and were unable to recall either the circumstances of their own survival or their family pre-war life. At the beginning of therapy, they seem to share a stereotypical belief that those who do not remember are better off. With time, they came to know the difficulty of living without multi-generational family memories, the difficulty of being from nowhere. Another important issue is identity problems. The question, who am I? It keeps returning in various contexts, most recently also in the final one, in which cemetery will I be buried? Some of group members are the real first generation, but many of them are rather generation 1.5, because they were very small children or newborns during the war. It means that some of their characteristics are similar to the survivors, and some are similar to the second generation. They were directly traumatized, but also they suffer from trauma transmission.
Now I give the example of Mrs. A's story. She's my patient. Mrs. A was born in 1942. She had a Jewish father and a Polish mother. Shortly after her birth, she was left in care of total strangers, where she remained until the end of the war. Mrs. A has single wartime memories associated with fear. In infancy, she was kept in hiding, isolated from other people. So she was not at home with these caregivers. Both the parents survived the war and took her back from the hiding. In the patient's family, there has been no narration concerning her wartime experiences. She was born on returning home after the war. When entering therapy, the patient had a severe pain syndrome of unclear etiology which impaired her functioning. She was also operated because of that. This pain, she was associated with the ectopic pregnancy, and during the therapy, she remembered that it had appeared for the first time during a trip to the Auschwitz Extermination Museum. In addition to the pain sensation, the patient felt that there was a part of her, separated, worried, to which she did not have access. We talked about the fear of breaking the wall of this part. I did not conceptualize it as a crypt in Abraham Torok meaning, but I talked about the possibility of making holes in the wall. This. After 2 years of therapy, the patients reported 2 dreams. Both depicted the world after a disaster, and in both, the patient wondering about could get no help. The dreams were accompanied by considerable motor agitation. The dreams were interpreted as a picture of the world after the Holocaust, but also of early experiences of the abandoned child. At that time, the patient's syndrome disappeared and sense of alien in the body. I understand the pain symptom as a body language associated with loss, the experience of the crypt. It appears after losing pregnancy in a confrontation with mourning for which there was no place during the visit to Auschwitz. Recovering of the speech, stories about her life, the ability to work through the trauma and symbolize her experiences in therapy, and also through the poems, she started to write poems, allowed the symptom to subside. The crypt in the patient's body contained not only unprocessed family mourning, but also her personal grief of the abandoned child. There is our publication about survivors in English, if you are interested. Also in 1999, I went to Romania, where I studied the psychological problems of the Romanian Jews who survived Holocaust. And the result of these studies were the articles and the book Life After Shoah, Consequences of Trauma in Holocaust Survivors, Testimonies from Poland and Romania. Now I would like to say a few words about the second generation. Of course, we had this previous presentation, so it will be very short. Transmission of the Holocaust trauma has been widely discussed in the psychoanalytic literature in terms of the transposition phenomenon or projective identification, where children contain their parents' uncontainable feelings of bereavement and aggression. The child begins to think, feel, and act in accordance with the projection and returns this feeling in the attempt to compensate for the parental losses through avoiding rebellion and giving up separation. The children feel they cannot leave their family home without a total loss of the object, since separation denotes death both symbolically and literally. The Holocaust trauma is transmitted with a devastating effect onto the child, mostly because the parents are unable to support the separation. Our Hungarian colleagues created and described the phenomenon of transgenerational atmosphere.
About second generation, the frequency and severity of difficulties experienced by the second generation as reported in psychoanalytic literature are a subject of considerable controversy. More and more popular is the view that Holocaust survivors' descendants essentially do not differ from the general population, and differences, if any, are relatively subtle. For example, latent vulnerability to distress manifested after their own traumatic injury. Moreover, evidently impaired functioning of the second generation is regarded as an exception rather than a rule. More recent studies where participants were the second generation members living either in Israel or in the USA, describe then relatively well-adjusted populations in which the transgenerational effect becomes less and less discernible, visible. Against this background, the small and relatively isolated group of the second generation members living in Poland seems particularly interesting and distinctive. Transgenerational transmission of trauma is more salient in this group than in the other samples studied. Why is it so? The estimated number of Jews in Poland ranges from several to about 12,000. In 1968, an eruption of anti-Semitism was followed by the last Jewish immigration from Poland. A small traumatized Jewish community left in Poland was keeping apart until 1989, when the Jewish organization began to emerge or re-emerge. Most of the survivors who remain in Poland came from Jewish families assimilated before the World War II. Due to their parents and their own experiences, they had identity problems. The vast majority survived the Holocaust on Aryan papers. For example, by hiding their Jewishness, and some of them continued this strategy after the war. After the Holocaust, people quite often purposefully cut themselves off from Jewishness, sought identities other than ethnic, merged into Polish community, and married Christian partners. The second generation children were often brought up in families with a double taboo, covering not only the Holocaust, but also the Jewish background of their parents, or a parent. This was the situation reported by 59 of the second generation respondents interviewed. The second generation members living for a long time in the country where not only a collective memory of the Holocaust was lacking, but also their parents' traumatic experiences were contrary to the predominating social narrations about the war. The Holocaust survivors who remained in Poland had been usually younger during the Holocaust than those who emigrated. Thus, they were at greater risk for development of post-traumatic stress disorder, since younger age of victims facilitates the transmission of trauma. Their children, the second generation, were born later. Thus, their identity formation took place in the difficult period between the years 1968 and 1980s, when Jewish issues were absent from the public discourse. It was difficult to acquire knowledge about Jewishness, and the Jewish community was destroyed. Due to all these factors, transgenerational phenomena are so salient and meaningful also nowadays among the Holocaust survivors' children living in Poland, and separation problems are so important. Therapeutic group for the second generation started in the late 1998. We have been meeting every 2-3 months at more or less 6-hour session. In the initial stage, the group was entirely open, but since 2007 till 2014, following a discussion in the group, our rules have been changed to a slow open group. The initial rules seems to have resulted from the need to create a non-excluding climate in the group of people frequently experiencing a sense of exclusion. However, with the group work proceeding to a deeper level, a need for security prevailed and limits have been set. The decision to close the group was preceded by establishment of the Second Generation Association, the first formalized organization of this type in Poland. The association, which exists to this day, seems to be a good answer to the identity and community needs of its members. In this way, the inevitable development process, observed earlier also in the West, of turning away from the psychiatric understanding of the issues of the second generation took place. This group more and more often talks about itself in the language of identity choices, pride, and the cultivation of memory. At a similar time, the second generation began a debate about the condition using the language of literature and art. The debate turned out to be of universal importance. At least a few second generation condition books have been widely discussed, mainstreamed. Their key experiences, peripherality, marginality, alienation, not belonging, being different, searching, uncertainty, having to make choices, fluid identity, turned out to be universal and important for contemporary societies. At the same time, group therapy conducted in the form of one-day marathon session held every 2-3 months turned out to be insufficient to eliminate the more serious problems of some group members. Some of them opted for individual psychotherapy. It can be said that the group working in such settings has fulfilled its task, serving for years as the only place where the second generation could meet. Now, we work with the second generation individually, so we don't have the special program for them, but they often search for the therapist who is better oriented in the specificity of the problems.
That is the case study about the representative of the second generation. Mrs. B, age 70, has suffered for years from recurring depression. When experiencing a relapse, she is overwhelmed by guilt feelings associated with her being responsible for a catastrophe, has somatic symptoms, and is fearing that she might kill herself. She has no suicidal thoughts, but is afraid that her suicide may occur beyond her, as if externally from the outside. Her depression relapses are triggered by her problems at work. She begins to feel that she is going to lose everything and her family will be pushed into poverty due to her own fault. Mrs. B. father, a Holocaust survivor, never mentions his wartime experiences. The patient's partial knowledge about this issue comes from her distant relatives. In her early 20s, Mrs. B. had a car accident while she was driving. Her sister was killed then. Soon afterwards, the patient's father died. The accident is never talked about in the family. Mrs. B has a long life belief that a better, more gifted, and more loved person died because of her. She is unaware that the same beliefs are expressed by survivors talking about their murdered family members. The patient's grandfather died before the war, stabbed by death by his Polish business partner, allegedly a friend, who came to visit him at home. The patient lives with an unopened crypt where not only her sister, but also all his father's pro-war family, including his father's first wife, are buried. The family's experience, dating back to the pre-war period, involves a sudden and unexpected catastrophe returning in the patient's experience of illness. And now I would like to say something about the social memory in Poland. We started to talk it after your presentation. Based on the therapeutic experiences with different patients, we believe that the most important unresolved problem residing in our patients' subconscious minds, our patients' subconscious minds, is the Holocaust heritage being ignored. Work by cultural researchers show that what we see in our offices not only concerns individual patients, but also feature in Polish society. Literary historian Tomasz Żukowski, in his book, states, "A characteristic feature of Polish culture is guilt in connection with the Holocaust. This surfaces from time to time, but it is not acknowledged or considered. The slightest suggestion about the complicity of Poles in the Holocaust evokes immediate resistance before it can even reach consciousness." According to the author, cultural messages in the form of stories and films build a subtle narrative that protects Poles' self-perception as rescuers of Jews, contrary to historical facts which demonstrate that active participation of Polish citizens in murders of Jews. Poland is a country in which since 2000 a public debate about the Holocaust has been taking place. The research of historians clearly shows that the term bystanders, an indifferent witness, is not appropriate to a situation in which, after the liquidation of the ghettos in Poland, there was a hunt for other Jews who then died in the hands of or as a result of denunciation by Poles. In addition, Poles benefited materially from the Holocaust by occupying houses and social spaces previously occupied by Jews. The suppressed subject of the Holocaust in Poland has re-emerged in studies by historians and in new culture messages, but also in strengthening of calls for the defense of the good name of Poles. Political scientist Piotr Forecki described this using a term borrowed from sociology. This is the term backlash. This is a defensive group mechanism involving displacement and the distortion of reality. In practice, there are actions of individuals and state institutions attacking historical research that are a threat to specific formulas of historical memory and national identity. Me and Krzysztof Szwajca, published a chapter in Anna Zajękowska and Uri Lewin book about the social memory of the Holocaust in Poland. In this chapter, we attempt to present the social process taking place in Poland, and we present material from a workshop conducted during the psychotherapeutic conference regarding the social memory suppression of the Holocaust. Two parallel processes can currently be seen in Poland. One is the presence of a Shoah complex in Polish society, means difficulty in thinking and talking about the Holocaust due to the guilt feelings. The difficulty in facing this fragment of the Polish history may be related to a conspiracy of silence that exists also in Polish families. As same as survivors' children protect their parents from pain, children of the Holocaust bystanders protect their parents from shame. The other process involves an increased interest of the Polish society in survivors' testimonies presented in books, films, or their personal narratives, together with attempts to embed them into the whole history of Jewish life in Poland. Sometimes an impression may arise that the two processes are dissociated, and that the Polish society tends to share mutually contradictory beliefs, thoughts, and feelings. So we believe that the Holocaust transmission is not Jewish, but mainly Polish problem, important for contemporary Polish society. And in the end, we would like to share with you the preliminary results of our program. One of the goals of the program, apart from learning about the experiences from other countries, is to disseminate knowledge about the intergenerational transmission of trauma. Researchers from Poland conducted a lecture for psychotherapists, which was posted online here and received more than 3,000 views. In addition, we met with the representatives of the second generation. Participants gave their consent for the meeting to be recorded and used for the program purposes, and we would like to present this meeting description. The meeting was attended by 20-30 people aged between 40 and 70, with a significant majority of women. At the beginning of the meeting, we presented the concept of transgenerational transmission and the result of research on trauma transmission conducted in various countries and invited to the conversation. Initially, the participants of the meeting began to ask how it is in the countries where other researchers within the Visegrad program came from. It turned out that one of the people had spent many years in Hungary and shared her experience. Participants were clearly not ready to relate to their experience. After about a quarter of an hour, the subject of Hungary clearly exhausted itself, and one participant says that as a biologist, she has read a lot of work on the genetic of inheritance and is tired of hearing that scientists do not agree. The group process in which the participants talk about the lack of trust in scientists, therapists, and perhaps indirectly also in speaking in the group in which the meeting is taking place. It's becoming more and more clearly visible. One of the participants says, "Well, if this science is not so clear, what is it like when I turn to a therapist with my loneliness? Are there any procedures? Can I trust? It is because of the therapist's belief that he will want to help me or not?" They talk about doctors, they turn for help, and they encounter jokes or anti-Semitic remarks. One participant says of this remark, "It was a silly joke, but I am afraid to go to people my life depends on." Remarks are made about the therapeutic value of the second generation groups, this group we have, and the safety of meeting in a group with similar experiences. They start talking about different experiences, understanding and lack of understanding by therapists and in the therapy groups. After this introduction, which we understand as a group safety study, the members of the meeting began to tell their stories. They talk about the circumstances in which they found out about the Jewish origin of one of their parents, usually the mother. They say how little they know about the family and what they are doing to find out more about them. One of the participants says, "I feel guilty why I didn't ask earlier." The other answer in unison, "We all have it. We didn't ask because they taught us not to ask." Another participant says, "I want to say more because I think I am screwed in another way and I feel lonely. I want to ask if anyone has it. My father's entire family died. He was the only one who survived. I have the impression that if it wasn't for the war, my father and mother would not have met, and this genetic mix in my character would not have been created. My father didn't know much. I managed to find many names of those people who died, and over time I feel worse and worse with the feeling that they had to die so that I could live, and each new name is guilt, not joy. It is such a mess I can't deal with. People in the group say it sounds like survivor's guilt." The participant continues, "My father's guilt must have been enormous. He fled to Russia, took his brother. He left his wife with twin boys who had just been born. He wanted to fetch his wife and went to the Russian authorities, where he and his brother were arrested. He survived, his brother didn't. I have this guilt on my neck now." The statement of the participant who participated in the psychotherapeutic group of the second generation concludes, "I, as a long-term participant of the therapeutic group, can say that I have worked through a lot of things thanks to therapy. This group turned into a kind of family, and we remain close to this day. What you said doesn't surprise me." We quote a fragment of the meeting with the second generation to show how vivid their experiences related to the intergenerational transmission of trauma are. The meeting also shows a great need for psychotherapeutic help. In a relatively short time, the meeting lasted 2 hours. The discussion group turns into a psychotherapeutic group. Thank you very much.